This program is a presentation of the Center for Sacramento History.
My name is April Adachi. I was born in Sacramento, and then I grew up on 4th Street right in J-Town. My father had a dry goods store right on the corner between L and M, right on the corner on 4th Street. The redevelopment, I thought they were going to make the town look beautiful. I said, what happened?
In the years following World War II, redevelopment changed the face of cities all across America. Sacramento, California helped pave the way for that change by pioneering a redevelopment blueprint that became a model for the nation. Sacramento also demonstrated the devastation of redevelopment by removing hundreds of businesses and thousands of residents from the face of its own city.
This is Sacramento's West End, a section of the city rich in history, but decayed by the passage of time. Much of the old city is gone now, cleared away by the massive clearing effort by the Sacramento Redevelopment Agency.
It had a lot of power. At one point, the Redevelopment Agency had so much money flowing in from the project development that it was called Little City Hall. And it was the city hall that had the money that you could do something with.
I expect the Capitol Mall project to demonstrate to the people of this city and to other cities what can be accomplished through redevelopment.
I'm glad that they're tearing down buildings and making a better place. I'm against it, of course, because there's so many people that lost their business being here for so many years.
I don't want to move, I moved already one time.
Well, the West End of Sacramento was always, since it was Sacramento's first community, first neighborhood really, was always very diverse. Once redevelopment was completed, that community went away.
The city of Sacramento started at the river. The gold rush brought people from all over the world here. It always was this point of entry for the city, and it always was a place where multiple languages have been spoken. Sacramento was the original terminus of the Transcontinental Railroad. That's what connected California to the rest of the country.
And at the end of the 1860s, this magnificent, beautiful state capital that we have here in Sacramento was built, and the city begins to migrate steadily eastward.
New population of immigrants and migrants moved in. It was, in many ways, an extraordinarily integrated, multiracial, mixed-use neighborhood, but one that represented a negative in the eyes of the local business community.
Next door was a Chinese barber. Next door was an Italian running a hotel. Across the street was a Greek family, the Mantis family. It was kind of nice and colorful, I thought.
It was known as the labor market, and labor hiring was done in that area. And it's a very important part of our economic history. The term West End was often used, the meaning kind of slid around. So even though it was true that there were slums in the West End, it is not true that the West End was a slum.
That was the area that you first approached when you came to the city, and that was the part that was becoming warehouses and transients and so forth. And they wanted to clean that all up so that when you approached the city, it was a city beautiful.
In the end, despite the diversity of neighborhoods and businesses in the West End, Sacramento declared the entire area blighted and its riverfront a skid row. City Councilman Albert Marty summed up the views of many in City Hall when he said, "One of the worst slum areas in the United States is on our own front doorstep." And as the area was allowed to decay even further, one film dramatized the point this way.
Shabby, mutilated, defiled, decaying and crumbling into ruins. The remnants of the original city, these mute witnesses to history, stand abandoned and all but forgotten.
On June 15, 1954, the Sacramento City Council called a special meeting to hear public testimony for the first time regarding the proposed Capitol Mall redevelopment project. Sacramento's Japantown, often called a city within a city and one of the most significant Japanese communities in the United States, stood in the way. Henry Taketa, a well-known local attorney and prominent Sacramento-born Japanese American, was the first to speak. "We have our whole heart and soul in what will take place here," he told the council. "We have considerable fondness for our community. For that reason, after our wartime dislocation, we always dreamt of coming back here. And when I say coming back here, I mean to Sacramento."
It was a real nice neighborhood, you know, everybody knew everybody.
We lived behind a boarding house on Capitol Avenue. And in the back of the boarding house was a two-story house. Then we lived downstairs and two other families lived upstairs.
It was fun. We all went to the same elementary school. It's called the Lincoln Elementary School, and also junior high too. And we kind of stuck around. We formed our own group of friends.
When we were located all in Japantown, we had to, even though we're sitting within the city, we also had to have activities. We kind of took care of our own. We developed programs for our kids.
Then there was pool halls, and then there was restaurants. So, you know, J-Town was still booming, you know, pretty good.
It's not like the slum district of a lot of cities, not at all. I mean, it was very clean, and the property owners always kept their place neat. Oh yeah, there's no such thing as blight.
In the 1954 elections, a bond measure asking the public to pay for the Capitol Mall project failed. Japantown was saved. So the agency decided to work around the voters and use a new financing model that would transform urban renewal all across America.
The Sacramento model was the first use of what's now called tax increment financing.
The financing of the Capitol Mall project, this agency itself pays for by issuing its own bond issue. And this bond issue is secured only by the increase in tax revenue that will flow from this project area when the new buildings are in place.
It became a model that other redevelopment zones throughout the country used as a model. That's the Sacramento model, is the financing method.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a historic day. Not only as your governor, but as your neighbor. Of many years' residence here in Sacramento, I am very proud of this city. Planned redevelopment will ensure that here, where much of California was born, will continue the dynamic, the vital force of the 20th century.
So what you see on that day is civic pride over the idea of tearing down the old city.
Sacramento has recently passed the threshold of a magnificent promise for the future. This city will continue to teem with activity to attract new people, new industry, new culture, new business.
That between 1957 and 1961, there were close to 2,000 people relocated out of the West End.
Well, I was mad because I thought, not again. I said, we got a double dipper, you know. I said, here they chased us out, you know, to go to camp, and then we came back, and all the businesses are doing okay now.
Particularly Japanese American owners said, we just were kicked out of Japantown because of World War II. And we came back, spent the last 5 years rebuilding Japantown, and now you're going to kick us out again. So some of them, you know, directly said this is like a second relocation.
To lose it and then come back and start all over and then to lose it again, that has to be tough. And I think after the redevelopment, a lot of the stores owners didn't have a store anymore.
Sacramento was a very thorough example of the destruction of a Japantown, probably the most thorough on the West Coast. And considering the fact that Sacramento had, in the 1920s, by population percentage, been the most Japanese city of any American city, that's a really significant change.
For many of the displaced residents in Japantown, redevelopment meant a move to the South Side Park area of Sacramento. But for some, that move would lead to yet a third relocation.
Yeah, my father had a fish market business on 3rd between K and L. Then he built another building, a fish market, on 10th and X, until the freeway construction came in, and he made a move again.
We're looking now at the area between W and X streets.
Interstate highways, of course, were another method used to move people permanently out of downtown in areas that hadn't yet otherwise received the scalpel of redevelopment.
In addition to the Japanese community, other minority groups in the West End were moved out as well. But because of redlining and restrictive covenants that existed in Sacramento's newer neighborhoods, their housing options were limited. Nathaniel Colley, Sacramento's pioneering civil rights attorney, represented many West End residents during redevelopment.
There are certain human values at stake here that we are not paying enough attention to. Usually, minority group people are the ones who inhabit the areas first cleared by urban redevelopment. But it seems to me almost immoral for a government to go in and tell a slum dweller, we're going to clear you out, and then have him go out and face a closed housing market.
When people were being replaced in the around 2nd, 3rd, in the West End, I was on across the street from our Crocker's Art Gallery. When they started designating where people were going to go in order to have them get out of the way, they designated blacks to Oak Park. This was part of what I call the beginning of the destruction of Oak Park.
And what happened is because redlining, again in the 1950s, still took place, those areas became the next areas declared blighted. And before you know it, all of these exodus neighborhoods became the new redevelopment zones.
The first construction project there was the federal building, and Governor Pat Brown and many people show up with shovels to ceremonially dig in the dirt.
We are currently in the process of converting a slum and blighted area into a valuable, new, integral part of our downtown. In the background, you can see construction underway on this $6.5 million office building.
The federal building marked the first urban renewal construction project in the western U.S., and it immediately demonstrated the upside of the Sacramento model, generating 70% of the tax revenue formerly collected by the entire 15 blocks of the Capitol Mall area. What was lost, on the other hand, was what made the West End such an interesting place for so many people.
Yeah, where you see the John Moss building, federal building here, 600 Capitol Mall, was the actual location of the Momo Club. In many cases, well-known people like Billie Holiday and others would come here and perform in their after-hours settings. The building that is now the Cassidy Turley building sits on the original location of the Zanzibar Club, which was a nightclub cafe founded roughly around 1942 by Louise and Isaac Anderson, an African-American couple, who were able to secure a liquor license that was basically vacated by a Japanese-American citizen who was interned during World War II. Musicians who came in from acts that were performing at the Memorial Auditorium, such as Count Basie, Duke Ellington, and those people, they would come to the Zanzibar late at night and do after-hours gigs as well. So clubs like the Momo and the Zanzibar and that allowed for mixed clientele created the basis for people to come together.
That's jazz's unique power, is decades before the civil rights movement, it's encouraging this cross-cultural connection that translates into subsequent generations of music, and they become American ideas with cross-racial, cross-cultural appeal. And Sacramento was a fantastic example of how that process happened. It's just that the evidence has been mostly wiped clean by redevelopment.
The redevelopment of Capitol Avenue into Capitol Mall was hailed as a model for the nation by California Governor Pat Brown, and with the completion of the adjoining Capitol Towers apartment complex, Sacramento was declared the winner in a competition to determine the best urban renewal project in the United States.
On behalf of the City of Sacramento, I wish to say that we are very proud and very gratified at the selection of Sacramento to receive this award this year. It exemplifies the vast improvements which have been made in our community.
With a new gateway into the city of Sacramento now complete, an even newer gateway would soon be in the works, one that would change everything.
Looking east, toward Sacramento's old historic West End. This is probably the most controversial area in the whole freeway problem because of the historical buildings involved.
Well, I-5 is one of those greatest controversies. I like to say it's probably the biggest controversy to hit the city in the last half of the 20th century.
The debate surrounding the placement of the new interstate highway through Sacramento became the ultimate battle of preservation versus progress.
We do not believe that the historical values which are inherent in the west end of the city of Sacramento have been adequately evaluated.
I think it's a bad idea because Sacramento only has a few historic places. I think we should preserve them.
You had the awakening of this sleeping giant, I call it, of historic preservation. Wait a minute, this is where our city was born.
The preservation community, led by Sacramento Bee publisher Eleanor McClatchy, wanted the highway placed on the Yolo County side of the river. The Redevelopment Agency, the City Council, and the business community, on the other hand, wanted the new highway to cut right through downtown.
So a big brouhaha developed. McClatchy asked John Kennedy to intercede in this matter, and so his administration, right at the beginning as they took office, froze the money for I-5, and it stayed frozen, and both ends were completed and the middle wasn't.
On June 28, 1961, the Sacramento Redevelopment Agency received word that the White House ordered the U.S. Bureau of Public Roads to withhold all federal money earmarked for the design and planning of Interstate 5 through downtown Sacramento, while the Department of the Interior conducted a study of the historic buildings in the area. 1 week later, Sacramento Mayor James McKinney sent a letter to the President pledging cooperation with the study and conveying the city's desperate need for the new freeway.
That it is the consensus of the Council that urgency exists for the adoption of routes and construction of these badly needed highway facilities.
The role that JFK plays in the freeway to me is fascinating because how many times does a president get involved with a freeway construction? Not very often. But the fact that he took those steps, I think it was important because they were obviously at a stalemate. And somebody had to say, straighten up and play nice.
They managed to free that money up just about the time Kennedy was assassinated. And I-5 was completed, and the compromise was it wouldn't be a straight line through downtown. It would bulge out and preserve the little area we call Old Sacramento Historic Area.
The only thing I can say is I hope they start the construction and get things underway and stop all this bickering.
The I-5 compromise also satisfied the demands of one of America's most iconic retailers.
Macy's wanted to have freeway access and wouldn't build in the redevelopment area unless there was close nearby freeway access.
So it was extremely important to locals to have that retail business here, to have a store that size that really marked us as a significant city.
My friends, the confidence that the management of Macy's has shown in our great state and in Sacramento is demonstrated by this, the largest store ever opened in the Sacramento Valley.
The new downtown Macy's also served as a catalyst for the redevelopment and transformation of Sacramento's original Main Street.
And K Street's a very old street, and you're faced with either letting it continue to get older and worse or revitalizing it, and that's the thinking behind it.
That thinking involved the creation of a new downtown plaza that would take up the 3 blocks just east of Macy's, and beyond that, a new controversial pedestrian-only mall that would stretch for another 6 blocks.
Well, the mall should be a peaceful area to come be involved with. There should be a lot of water. There are 5 fountains in the mall. There'll be a lot of green area, a lot of benches to sit, and it should be a very pleasant place to be.
We think from that point of view that this has to be more pleasant than a dirty old street that's been around for 100 years.
My sense was that removing automobiles from the downtown would be something that merchants would want because people would stroll and take their time.
I think if you look at the K Street pedestrian area, they were forcing something that they weren't quite ready for, and it didn't really stick or it didn't really work.
By the mid-1960s, as the area below the K Street Mall and the downtown plaza was being cleared to make way for I-5 and Old Sacramento, redevelopment finally addressed its Skid Row dilemma.
Sacramento's West End area, it's in the lower part of Sacramento, 1st, 2nd, 3rd Streets, J and K, and probably the most famous landmark in the West End is the Capital City Rescue Mission. Today we're going to talk about what's going to happen down here in the West End after the mission closes. Hal, what do you think will happen, especially to the men themselves?
There's an absolute pressure going to be put on to run these men out of this West End Skid Row. Now you watch. The powers that be are going to put the pressure on to run the bums, as they call them, out of the West End, which is rightfully their home, which has not been there's been no means provided for them, and so they're being forced right over town. And believe it or not, there's a brand new Skid Row being formed here in this city.
I know places right here on the street which are tearing down. And right today, when they tear them down, where will the bum go?
The way redevelopment handled in the early days a lot of these transient populations that were living some of these depressed areas is they give them a bus ticket to Stockton. They just move them out.
If you compare that to the Gold Rush, it's very similar. In Gold Rush, California, it was mainly transient men that were living there. And so you have this odd parallel of very similar things, but you have a society that's now saying, I don't like that, that's not acceptable. We're not the Wild West anymore. We have to represent something better than that.
There are 89 parcels in the old Sacramento development. The Sacramento Redevelopment Agency has already named developers of or received proposals on 81 of them.
Old Sacramento, as we call it today, was established as a National Historic Landmark before the Federal Preservation Act went into effect. That's an amazing fact, and so they brought in my predecessor, Jim Henley, and said, okay, we need some historical review.
Old Sacramento as an idea is part of the I-5 mitigation. The thought was they could get the federal government to pay for a study to conceive it. Old Sacramento is one of the first historic urban renewal projects in the United States. And there was no model for this. And the means was established by using what's called tax increment money that would be available through the redevelopment agency. It took a long time to get the first building up.
Through the development in the next 10 years of Old Sacramento, we will recreate some of this history and preserve it for the enlightenment and the enjoyment of the people of our state and our nation. It will tell the story of California and Sacramento from the gold rush days of 1849 through the year of 1870.
From its outset, Old Sacramento became one of the city's new crown jewels and its biggest tourist attraction, drawing visitors from around the world. And by the mid-1970s, the transformation of the city's old Skid Row into Old Sacramento marked the completion of the redevelopment era in Sacramento.
The thing that I remember most is being a part of a process that has seen a portion of downtown Sacramento change very dramatically.
From its humble beginning along the banks of a restless river, Sacramento has emerged a modern, dynamic metropolis.
The biggest thing that worked about redevelopment is that the business community made tons of money. Property values went up 75-fold in the redevelopment zones. That's one reason why the Sacramento model became the standard. The consequences for the people who lived here were much more dire.
There was some progress being made in that in terms of overall business growth and all of that, but the sense of community that was destroyed here is going to be hard to replace.
And who gets to make that decision that you're not good enough? I don't want you to be at the gateway to our city. So when you make decisions about redevelopment and so forth, that every time you make those decisions, something else gets displaced.
Yeah, I thought they would really improve the whole environment. Sacramento Union was where we lived, and then I keep walking around. I said, well, where's the redevelopment? You know, I said, why did they have to take all our land for? I said, even if J-Town was there, it still would have looked nice. That's what I thought.
Before redevelopment in 1950, 4,467 people lived in the U.S. Census tract that included almost all of Japantown and Capitol Mall. After redevelopment in 1970, that number dropped to 377, a population loss of 92%. In the 15 square block area of the Capitol Mall redevelopment zone, 350 businesses were displaced.
It's really important today to think about this because now we have this very different notion. The trend now is to mix the old with the new and to have mixed use and not single use zoning.
What a city tries to do, what Sacramento values now in terms of all kinds of various people living near each other, getting along with each other, respecting each other. There was something there that got lost when those bulldozers and wrecking balls came through.
In order for Sacramento to maintain its edge, it will have to have a vibrant core that is diverse economically, that is diverse in terms of the amount of affordable and mixed-use housing that's available. And hopefully with that comes back the vibrancy of the communities that we once had.